continue the study of the cutting effects of the Cluny Falchion, the cleaver style falchion based around the find in the Musée de Cluny in Paris, by starting to look at the kinds of armour that might actually be used at the time when this falchion was prevalent on the battlefield. Now the target is going to be the same as last time, namely it's going to be pork with the bones still in, and we're going to be cutting through the fleshier part. Now one of the good things about this pork, I'm going to bring it closer to the camera, is that as you can see here, the bone itself is cleanly cut, has been excised right through. Now this means that if we do actually manage to damage the bone in this particular target, because of the displacement of the blade inside the bone and any breakages of bone shards going in, this will actually start to extrude. So it gives us a good idea, even if we don't actually manage to get all the way down to the bone, if there's been any hydrostatic shock or blunt force trauma that's broken the bone. This is actually quite important in this case. Now the first armour that we're going to be using is padded armour. Now padded armour is quite important. Padded armour really serves many functions. One of the most important things is to dissipate the kinetic energy of a blow coming in at a target. This is done quite literally just by cushioning the blow itself, by distributing the actual force itself along as wide an area as possible. A sword will try and concentrate that force in as small an area as possible, so this is basically designed to stop that. It also allows you, as you can see here, to hang other bits of armour off of you. In this case the spolder, which in my case, this being my combat gambeson, is a 14th century, early 15th century spolder which covers my shoulder and protects my shoulder joints. You can also see from my gambeson just how thick this is. It has to be thick because it's got to have that cushioning effect. It's also got to be difficult to cut through. Because there's layer after layer after layer of material in here, energy has to be expended cutting through each layer. So the whole point behind this is to ensure that you are as protected as possible against blunt force trauma and cuts. So now, keeping with the premise that you should never be really too surprised by what an archaeologist is willing to get up to in their garden, I'm going to wrap up some pork. Now, in keeping with the truism that the softer and thicker a gambeson is, the better it is, I've wrapped this in about 30 layers of linen. Linen isn't a particularly thick kind of cloth, it's not a heavy cloth, which means that it actually manages to retain the kind of flexibility that you require when you're wearing it. However, it also retains a cushioning effect under compression. Now what we're going to do quickly is we're going to see if we can actually cut down through this and inflict the same kind of wounds that were inflicted on the targets that we saw in the last videos. Now, as can actually be seen here, there is no actual cut on the outside of the flesh at all. I'm just going to unwrap it rapidly to show you what happened. There is, however, a crease where the falchion itself made contact. That would cause a lot of bruising, possibly even deaden the arm temporarily, but as you can see at the bottom, there is no extrusion of the marrow out of the bone itself, so the bone is intact, and that's very important. So it may be temporarily painful, possibly even slightly debilitating, but as you can see, there's no cut, no incision has been made down into the bone at all, and when compared to last week's targets, which were exactly the same kind of meat with exactly the same kind of weapon, the devastation has been kept absolutely to a minimum. Intact bone, bruised muscles by all means, but the bone is intact, no chance of an amputation. The second kind of armour we'll be looking at is maille. Now this is the maille I've untailed off of my bassinet. I'm just replacing it at the moment, so it's quite handy to have hanging around. As you can see, it is a matrix made up simply of small extruded wire rings which are then bent over, flattened, interlinked with the other rings in a 4-to-1 pattern, and then riveted together. Now, we found examples of this all over, wherever there's a medieval battlefield, the most famous one obviously being Visby. I myself worked on a piece of this made of brass which had been found in Leicester about 5 years ago. Just goes to show how old I'm getting. Okay, the good thing about this is it is a very flexible and very tough passive defence between you and an incoming blow. However, one of the drawbacks with it is incredibly flexible. That flexibility does allow the kinetic energy of an incoming blow to be stopped slowly as opposed to quickly. If you stop it quickly, the energy's got to dissipate somewhere, and odds on that's going to be into you. Decelerating it instead of braking it suddenly is a much better option because it allows your body to move out of the way. And this also operates by a net effect. So as the blow comes in, it expands and it expands until the point at which it can't expand any further. But what we're going to do now is we're actually going to try a cut on a similar target and see just how effective the Cluny Falchion is on that. So, looking at the actual target itself, we can see again there is a crease in the top end where the falchion itself actually impacted, and that's quite a well defined target area itself. And you can also see in the actual slow motion video itself just how much of the force was imparted directly into the target. However, it's also important to note again there is nothing in the way of extrusion from the bone. So what we have is an intact bone. This area hasn't been cut into, there's no external bleeding, unlikely to bleed out, and the bone itself is, as far as we can tell, intact. However, the deviation of the Maille itself before it actually stopped the incoming blow was quite significant, and that's going to be painful if not debilitating in its own way. A shockwave moving out of here would cause massive bruising, possibly a little bit of internal bleeding, and possibly render the limb itself unusable for a long period of time. But Maille wasn't used without having at least something underneath it in the form of padding. And now what we're going to do, we're going to see just how effective my own armour is against an incoming falchion. Hopefully this is not going to be too much of an eye-opener for me. See what I did there? Now here, the bone has been placed more or less in the same position as my radius and armour would be while I was actually wearing this and fighting. Because it's at the end of my arm, it's one of the fastest moving parts of my body when I'm actually attacking an opponent or when I'm defending, which means that the kinetic energy involved is going to be much greater than any other part of my arm. This is actually quite important for me because I've been fighting in this gambeson and this Maille for quite some time, so I want to find out whether it'd be effective or not. Now I must admit, I'm actually quite pleased with this. As you can see, yes, there has actually been a depression caused by the actual impact point of the falchion itself, where it intercepted the Maille and where the gambeson, must admit, is actually at one of the thinnest parts of the entire gambeson's padding. But it's got to be noted, again, there is no extrusion of marrow from the bone, meaning that that bone hasn't been intercepted. So in other words, I get to take my hand home while it's still attached to me, which at the end of the day has got to be a good thing. Let's go and cut some meat. And as can be seen, that's what the two types of armour working in conjunction together, one, the padding to absorb the kinetic energy, and the Maille to intercept the cutting edge, prevents. Again, a very deep cut which extends all the way down to the bone, and as you can see has intercepted and caused extrusion of marrow, so we know that the bone is in fact broken without me putting my hand in there and demonstrating that it is. And that is a very, very clean cutting edge cut. So it can be said, without those two forms of armour, the padding and the mail itself, that weapon would be absolutely devastating. However, the simple combination of something to absorb kinetic energy, spread the load, and the mail itself to actually intercept the cutting edge, give it something that's very difficult to cut through, and at the same time act as a net to actually slow that blade down in conjunction with the padding, is a very, very effective way of stopping a weapon even as devastating as the falchion. In the next video we're going to look at plate armour and see how effective that is against a cleaver falchion of the style of the Cluny Falchion. Then we're going to start looking at the later falchions, the cusped varieties such as the Thorpe Falchion, and see how that evolved to deal with the enhanced armour defence that was coming onto the battlefield during the 12th, 13th and 14th centuries. See you then. Bye.